Of Dad Saves America. John Popola here, and this is our first live stream. I am very excited that more than my mom is watching. We hope to do this at least monthly, if not more, and we have worked hard to set up a thing that feels kind of professional, so we're going to do our best. And let's dive right into it. First of all, let me just say I want to send out a big thanks to all of you who have shown up to this channel, who have subscribed to Dad Saves America. You know, just a year ago, we were at 20,000 subscribers. And now as we sit here, we're over 200,000, which is, it's frankly an honor because there's no reason for anyone to show up and care about anything I have to say. And I try my best to bring value to the channel and to you as viewers, as moms and dads and Americans and those of you that are abroad. So, we'll get right to it. I see that we've got a couple questions already in the queue. I want to start off with a few from the backlog and then dive into some of your live questions. Let's go for it. We got Tim and Sam and Nolan here in the office with me. So it looks like I'm by myself. I have support. All right. From my favorite foe, Richard Thurston. Poor Dad. Adrift in a world which he tries his hardest not to understand and populated with people who are out to get him. Boo-hoo. Oh, Richard, I hope you show up and I can answer some real-time questions from you, my friend. You know, of course I don't agree with this comment. Frankly, it cuts to something that's at the center of what this channel is all about, and that is agency. I don't feel like the world's out to get me or out to get people like me, whatever that's supposed to mean. In fact, I think the antidote to that feeling is embracing your own capability. And this is something that I think we as dads play a really important role in for our kids, is pushing them out into the world and having them understand that the world is going to beat them up and that they can take it, that they can survive the pressure and actually that they need a little bit of that. You actually need a little bit of bullying pretty early. And that's another thing we do as dads, right? We rough and tumble play, we tease. This kind of early bullying turns out to be really important for our kids to grow up to be healthy, functional people with low anxiety and a desire to get their driver's license when they turn 16. So, Richard, what can I say? I am not a victim of this world, even though we all get victimized from time to time. Let's see, what else we got? Okay. And we've stacked a couple critical ones because it's way more fun. David Watkin. Cut the crap, Dad. If you're such a great dad, you would pay real attention to the environment you will be leaving to your children and grandchildren. What makes us, and I think he means humans, unique is the massive extent to which we have altered the environment in a very short period of time, outstripping evolution's ability to fill the ecological niches we have destroyed. The simplistic libertarian and/or right-wing ideology of this site is getting in the way of rational, policy-driven discussion. Okay, I'm going to try not to go on too long a diatribe here because we've got a lot of things to get to. But I disagree. Well, let me say this. I agree that we as human beings are incredibly unique on this planet. We are able to impact our environment in ways that are unlike any of the other animals. And specifically, though, most of the ways we're able to impact our environment are making it better. Now, sometimes it's making it better for us as humans and not as great for the other animals and creatures that we are living with and surrounded by, right? So I think that's totally true. I think we have an obligation to a large extent to be good stewards of the natural world. In fact, I think this is one of the greatest tragedies of the climate crisis hysterics, is that they've actually crowded out the rest of environmentalism. You know, Michael Schellenberger, who we've had on the show, and many others have pointed out that the broader environmental movement has actually shrunk as CO2, which is also plant food, has become the only thing anybody cares about. To be an environmentalist today has increasingly been to be apocalyptic about climate change. Now, I happen to think that a lot of the impacts we make on the planet are good. The world, as my friend Alex Epstein likes to put it, is actually not a kind of caring, careful nurturer. This is this Jean-Jacques Rousseau romance that we all kind of feel, and it feels very natural that, oh, the world was better in the time of Pocahontas, and we lived in a careful balance with nature. That's never been true. Nature is super harsh. It is not plentiful by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, the things we take for granted, like apples occurring in the natural world are mostly inedible. So the apples we all love are a product of human impact on the world. And that is true for basically everything. So I don't think human impact is bad. In fact, I don't care that we impact the environment. I care about the quality of the impact, first for humans, and then in a certain kind of sustainable way for the rest of life. I don't want us to dominate the planet and turn it into a sewage waste dump with nothing but wealthy people and everybody else being animals and plants living in misery. I don't want that. But it turns out that's not what humans do. In fact, we now exist at an interesting time. It's in the past couple of years, it's the first time that humans are now 50% living in cities. And because we tend to be able to concentrate in powerful ways, we have actually returned more of nature to the wild than at any point in recent history. In fact, the total number of trees in America is now above that of the 1920s. So we are actually pretty good at this. And that's all I have to say at this time. There's reasons to be worried about being good stewards. There isn't reason to believe that humans are going to trash the planet and ruin the world. All right,
let's take one from the comments.
All right, sounds good, Tim. All right, Brett Sorum. Do you think the division in our kids' schools between the parent/child is likely to continue to grow further apart, or do you see any evidence it's improving? Do you think that division in our kids' schools between parent and child? That's an interesting question. I think that it is really fundamentally wrong that our school system seems to be built to separate us from our kids. Now, there's a lot of nuance here. Education is obviously a big part of this channel. We do need our kids to separate from us. You know, I've talked about how my son went off to college in Italy this year, and it's a big emotional separation, and we're also proud of him for even being willing to do that. So I think it's good for our kids to experience being apart from us and developing themselves. But the extent to which the school system has turned into an aggressor against our relationships, and this obviously becomes especially crazy when you talk about the gender stuff and gender identity in places like California, actively hiding kids' choices from their parents. I mean, that is evil, is what that is. I don't know any other way to put it. I don't think the people doing it are demons, but I think they are possessed by bad ideas that are putting their kids at risk and damaging their own institutions. So I think we need to take education back as families and as parents. That's what we need to do. We need to own the fact that it's our job as parents to sculpt and shape the educational path of our kids. And that doesn't simply mean moving to the best neighborhood we can and putting them in the public school. That's almost never going to be the optimal situation. We have to be way more diligent about it. Ideally, either homeschool, religious school, or something that will respect and honor the role of the family and the family's values in the kids' upbringing and education. All right, let's. What else we got?
Back to the old ones.
I will also say this stuff's really hard. And not everybody has the kind of choices I'd like us to have. So there's a lot of work for us to do on that front. Okay. Otto Burgess says, back to some climate fun. This is actually a positive one. Okay, let's see. I find it hard to believe that this video was recommended to me. They must be slipping, the big they, to borrow a phrase. Keep doing this work. The world needs voices like yours. The more voices, the better. The more children, the better. CO2 is not a problem. Small increases are greening the planet, and that is good for everyone. Well, I will say I broadly agree. I do think there is costs associated with CO2 and climate change. I don't think it's costless. So I think the right way to think about this is actually cost benefit. So on the benefit side, we have a dramatically greener planet because CO2 is plant food. And I do think that the failure of our information system and our media to actually grapple with the climate issue rationally and use cost-benefit analysis instead of all cost and all catastrophe is a big reason why so many of our kids are saying they don't want to have kids. I've covered this on the channel quite a bit, that upwards of 40% of young people say they don't want to have a family because they're worried about the future of the planet. That is a piece of evidence that our leading institutions are engaged in the most widespread misinformation campaign humanity has ever seen. Because you don't have to dig that hard to see that humanity is going to be here and actually be materially better off 100 years from now, according to all of the people who actually do the science on this. Let's see, what else?
It's a related one from the live comments.
All right, cool. Let's see. Put it up.
No.
Baha. Humans are terrible for the planet and always have been. Okay. We have a fundamental philosophical disagreement here, my friend. I thank you for coming and asking the question. I'm going to do my best. I don't know that I can be persuasive. We got a lot of planets in this universe. We got a bunch of planets here in our solar system. They aren't beings. Mars doesn't care about its existence because it's not a being. It is not alive. Neither is Earth. So the notion that humans are terrible for the planet, and I'm not trying to be semantic here. I'm trying to actually address the philosophical point that I think is underneath what you're saying. The planet doesn't care. The planet's been here for a long time. It will be here long after we're gone. And it doesn't have a mind to care. So the question is, what do you care about? What is below the surface here? Do you care about the planet being able to sustain life? Do you care about its ability to sustain human life? To have more humans living better? That's my fundamental starting point. I come at this first from, are we living better as a people? And specifically for those that are living the hardest. So part of this is being Catholic, but I think just being a humanist is, I think we should be concerned for those in the most need. And when it comes to the environment, we have a lot of work to do to get the last 2+ billion people out of desperate grinding poverty. And when we do, the world will actually get cleaner and better for everyone, including plants and animals. That is actually the history of human progress so far. I hope we can get there. I hope we don't nuke the whole place on the way to it. But that's my take. A planet with no humans, we've got plenty of those already. Plenty of dead rocks. I don't care about them. So that's my answer for you. I hope I hope it gives you something to think about, or maybe you think I'm a lunatic, and that's fine too. All right.
Okay, here's one on a slightly different topic.
All right. Of course. All right. So we started this channel in 2022, and I think in the early days, this was the most common question asked or statement made. Am I Jonah Hill? I don't know if this is a compliment or not. I would be inclined to say it's not. But I take your point. You're not alone. I wish I had the Hollywood success of Jonah Hill. Let's put it to you that way. Ephesians, too, by the way. I love it. Okay, very good.
Okay, another one.
All right, Jake P. How do you suggest navigating political discussions with acquaintances that you know you disagree with greatly? Okay, that's a great question. Well, I was reminded of something by my wife, Lisa, that I think is actually really powerful. And it's also like one of these how to win friends and influence people tactics. And that is start off by asking questions and listening. And I mean really listening. You know, why do you think that? And what about this? And what if you were wrong? How would you know if you were wrong? Give that person the chance to be heard and even repeat. And sometimes a good way to do this, it's called a context statement. Actually repeat their most core points back to them so that they understand that you heard them and understand what it is they're saying. And then offer your answer. And that gives you a couple things going for you. First of all, it treats the other person with dignity and respect, which I think is great. And if that person, if you know they disagree with you, then you have an interesting opportunity. You have the opportunity to be an ambassador for your ideas to someone who disagrees. So winning them over by being empathetic and being a good listener, which most people aren't, is really great. Then you give yourself the kind of permission to offer your point of view. And I think when you do that, you end up in a much better place. And you might even change the way you respond, having heard their perspective first. That's probably the best piece of advice I can give on that. I love to debate with people, and I actually find that it's the most gratifying when you can find common ground as a starting point and ask Socratic questions on the way to where the disagreement is, as opposed to trying to make strong, persuasive statements. I actually think one other piece of advice on this is give up on the idea that you're going to win an argument. So make that not the primary goal. See how effectively you can be an ambassador for the ideas you think the person disagrees with, and see if you can find any place where what you share, which is often the ends, like you want everyone to be doing better, or you want there to be more equality of opportunity, whatever it might be. Let that be your North Star, and then see if you can move them to at least be like, I've never thought of it that way before. That's the best victory you can ever hope for. All right, let's see.
Another education one.
All right, my favorite topic, education. Lynn Edwards. How do we expunge woke dogma from educators and re-educate them? Coming right at it. Okay. You're actually getting at the heart of a very difficult part of the problem. And I've done a lot of videos about education, and we've got kind of a monster video essay documentary that's in the works right now that is going to go into this in a lot more detail and the history. But there's a couple problems we face. And the first of all, getting a degree in education is basically subjecting yourself to commie nonsense for 4 years. And that's a fact. That it is the most social, critical, social justice, intersectional, blah-de-blah, gobbledygook thing you can do to yourself. And so that's a problem, because that's the supply chain into most of teaching. It really shouldn't be, because it's not especially good at arming people who get the degree with skills to impart information. There's been some really great people who've looked into, like, well, what actually does the education degree do? How much does it focus on managing a classroom with students and getting them to actually move their mastery of a subject? And it turns out not very much. It's a lot of ideology. It's a lot of synthetic nonsense, kind of like most of school itself. So I think the first and best answer I have is we have to start by changing the demand side of the equation. So pull your kids out of woke school. If you don't want woke, don't subject your kids to woke school. Don't be a contributor to the demand for woke school. I know that can be hard. I know you might not have a school in your area that you can afford. So I'm not saying this to be flippant and that it's easy, but that's the place where your agency can actually take action and prevent your kids from being subjected to woke nonsense. Down the line, if your own kids turn out to want to be teachers, don't let them go through a woke education. Help guide them on a path towards something better. All right.
All right. It's time to talk unions.
All right. Okay, Brian D. Oh, we got a lot of union stuff going on with the longshoremen and whatnot. I am conflicted on unions. On one hand, I understand that companies are usually heartless. Okay. On the other hand, unions have been shown to be just as power-seeking. Is there a middle ground here? I actually think this is beautifully put. So I'm actually with you on this. So first of all, I think we need to set aside public sector unions. So the firefighters, the cops, and especially the teachers, those should be legally abolished. They should be banned. You should not be able to unionize against the taxpayer in this country. So that's number one. Leaving those aside, let's talk about the unions more broadly. Now, my in-laws are in Detroit, and so, I've flown into Newark Airport many times and seen glorious Jimmy Hoffa's mural at the baggage claim of Delta Airlines. It is true, as we've seen this week with the longshoremen, and the guy with the chain talking like, hey, we could shut this whole thing down. I mean, yeah, that's gross. You're just being a mobster. You're basically running a racketeering operation holding people hostage. So what's the middle ground? Well, one of the problems is, and my memory of the history here is going to be a little fuzzy, is that like a lot of things in this country, the relationships got broken during the Great Depression because we had private sector unions, including like the AFL-CIO and things like that. But they were much more truly voluntary before, I believe it's the Wagner Act was passed, that established the National Labor Relations Board and all this government bureaucratic mandated stuff. Let me give you a particular example. So I'm here in Texas. We are a right-to-work state. So what that means is companies, employees cannot be forced to join a union to work at a company. This is actually, in a lot of ways, a bad second-rate measure to deal with the monopoly of unionism. Because let's just imagine for a moment a world where this organization that I run here for Dad Saves America, it's called Emergent Order Foundation. Let's say that I wanted to do a deal with a talent company that organized like a union, and in exchange for exclusively hiring people from their membership, we would get certain kinds of benefits and have a certain kind of contractual relationship. I think private enterprises should be able to do that. So right-to-work laws actually make that illegal. But that was a response to the fact that post-depression, what used to be much more of an emergent competitive environment between unions and employers was turned into another government bureaucratized monopolistic disaster. And so I think we have to revisit the legal structures that are governing the way companies and unions interact. And that might actually result in having more unionized workers. One last thing, and I realize I can go on forever about all of these subjects, but I worked for over a decade in television in New York City. And I think one of the things about one aspect of typical union agreements that is bad for the workers is what's called work rules. So work rules do things like constrain what your job could be. So for example, I've known video editors that worked for major like CBS, like broadcast networks, and they were all unionized. They were forbidden from touching the graphics machines. So what happened is, when the world began to change and the nonlinear sort of digital editing that we all now take for granted, that you can even do on your phone, started to come about, and that had embedded graphics capabilities, they were literally not allowed to use these things. And so talented editors were protected from adapting to the new environment and learning new skills that they might have actually loved. And so I know several people who ended up being shunted off to essentially the machine room instead of being an editor. I think that's terrible. I think work rules and trying to narrowly define jobs through union contracts, that is all a disaster and has no place in a modern workforce, and it's not good for anybody. We need flexibility as adults. We want variety and diversity in our work. All right. Hope that was useful. What else we got?
Another education one. It's more of a comment, but I think you'll have some stuff to say.
Sure. Okay. Charlottetown. Talking to your kids when they're really young, before they enter junior kindergarten, is important. Communication is extremely important to knowing what's going on with your child and how they're doing in school. So, I'm thinking about this here, junior kindergarten and the age. I think, I believe this profoundly, right? I mean, I think one of the things that I've learned about recently, for reasons I'll get to in future videos, I've gone through a bunch of training around trauma. And our kids need attention and interaction with us from the beginning. You know, one of our best videos is my interviews with Erica Kotsur, and she talks about bonding and attachment and how essential it is in the first couple of years of life to be attached, both physically and then emotionally. And it is the case that, for example, in orphanages in places like post-Soviet Ukraine and Russia, you would go to these places and none of the babies would be crying because they would have quickly learned that their cries go unanswered. And that this left permanent cognitive and even physiological damage to these kids. So we need to interact with our kids. We need to be with them. We need to be supporting their needs more or less as demanded in these early years as much as possible. We go through different stages. And I think the early years, it is about establishing a foundation of love and trust and security. And then it's about starting to back off and let them climb trees and come home covered in blood because they were getting into a sword fight, you know. I mean, not like fatal blood, but you know, the kind of stuff that most kids used to do sort of, you know, in like the Little Rascals. Like when you look at the old films, like the Little Rascals from the before times, where a bunch of 8-year-olds are running around the town, we need to get back to that. We need to have free-range parenting. And I think that will set us up to stay a free society. All right, what else we got?
I think you're going to recognize this one.
Tell them about the backseat in the car confession booth. So this is from my wife, Lisa. This is actually a really great piece of advice. I am jealous because my wife has managed to be the beneficiary of having these conversations with our son. So this is more true for boys, and it's actually especially true for boys. Boys don't like to look you in the eye and talk. They don't. In fact, I think even men, we really don't. We're apes. Even if you're not quite as hairy as me, we're all kind of like ape men. So when you have a son, one of the ways that you can get them to open up is to not be looking them in the eye in a confrontational way. They're little warriors. So a great time to do it, to have a conversation, is when they're in the car sitting in the back seat. and you're both looking ahead, and they're looking at the back of your head, and they don't feel judged or looked at. There's a kind of anonymity. It's actually a lot like the Catholic confessional, which, as it turns out, delivers like 90% of the benefits of psychotherapy, actually going to confession. Just getting to talk to somebody who's just sitting there listening, not looking at you. So this is actually a really great way to get your sons to open up and talk. And, as they get older, it continues to get harder. And then eventually they're just like, yeah, everything's fine. And that's about all you're going to get out of them. But if you want to push a little bit, put them in the back seat. If they are older, and if you're a dad and you want to talk to your kid, go for a walk. Walking together, side by side, shoulder to shoulder, especially out in nature, that is an awesome way to have a deep conversation with your kid. All right, what else we got?
This one's promoting us a bit to saving the world, but you'll get the
Okay,
gist.
all right, let's see. So Chad, Kate, Hovey. Dad saves the world. I like the promotion. I'll try. Has introduced me to a lot of great ideas and great thinkers so far. Really great stuff. Thanks for the nuanced responses to tropes we get bogged down with intellectually. I really appreciate that, man. It's funny. I'm a very ideological person. I have very strong beliefs. I tend to come down in very clear and strong ways. But I also think it's fun to not wrap your identity up in any one of these sorts of beliefs. There's ones that matter: faith, family, community. These things you should be grounding yourself in. But in intellectual ideas, political postures, you can't let them into your identity. And I try not to do that. In fact, one of the things that's kind of interesting is, I very much consider myself sort of a libertarian. And yet, I think many of you don't respond to sort of narrowly libertarian conversations. And it's interesting because I think the times are they say, may you live in interesting times. This is this sort of Chinese proverb that's not a compliment. It's kind of a warning, maybe even a curse. I think we live in those times, in interesting times. And I think they demand for out-of-the-box thinking and being open to incorporating points of view that might not align with what you're expecting. And I try my best to do that, even though I know Richard doesn't always think that way. But I appreciate the comment. Thank you.
It's a slight typo in this one, but you'll get the point, and it's good question.
All right. So Steve C. John, I'm conservative-libertarian, 59, from a poor mining background. I love my in-laws, but they hate Trump and are voting for Kamala, and think that I'm writing in my presidential candidate is bad. I think I'm writing in my help. Okay. I think you're getting at the question of how do I talk to my in-laws about our differing politics, right? This is an interesting question. I don't know that I have a great answer for. I have been mostly lucky in that my father and mother-in-law were pretty much politically well aligned. In fact, it was when I met my future father-in-law. It was one of the things I was like, all right, this is going to be cool. It was a sort of a put a check in the positive category for my then girlfriend, Lisa. This is sort of the same thing as the other answer I gave. Be the ambassador for your politics. Don't get angry. Remember to, honor your father and mother, even if they're your father and mother-in-law. And rather than seeing this kind of interaction as combat, because you don't want that. You don't want to be in a combative relationship with your in-laws over friggin' politics. It's really like the cost-benefit analysis there ain't great if you think you're going to win. That's a win that is a loss. So I would say this. The Trump situation for some people, especially older people, is bizarre. The weirdest thing about Donald Trump, as a candidate, looking all the way back to 2016, is that he was always kind of a moderate Democrat. Like always, like up until 2016, he was a moderate Democrat. You know, he got into some stuff about birther things with Obama and, you know, was big on being anti-free trade. That's all. It is what it is. But, you know, Trump derangement syndrome is real. And I don't know what you can do about it. If your in-laws are suffering from Trump derangement syndrome and think he's the neo-Hitler, maybe it's best just not to talk about politics when you're with them. I hope that's helpful. I'm not sure that it is. All right, what else we got? Drudge. Libertarians are the last people in the line to eat the scraps. I'm not sure I know what that means. The last people in the line to eat the scraps. I think it's funny. If I had to guess what you're getting at, my head goes to, are you saying when the inevitable communist breadlines come, will be put at the end? If that's what you're thinking, I think you're right, because libertarians are definitely the hardest hardcore anti-communists around, and so if neo-Stalinism arrives in America, we'll be grateful to be eating the scraps. There's a couple other ways I can imagine that going. If you have ever gone to or paid any attention to the Libertarian Party and its candidates, you are definitely right, because it is a clown show. So in terms of candidate scraps, yeah, here, you're correct. That's the best I got for you right now. I might be missing your intention. I'm sorry if I am. All right, Jake P. I've heard it stated we live in a profoundly stupid age, and yeah, this was a statement that Peter Boghossian made on our show, and he's not alone, and not alone on this channel. I think this is true and not true, right? So, in many ways, we live in the most profoundly intelligent age. I am sitting here live broadcasting myself in beautiful 4K with technology that would look like absolute magic to people just going back to 1985. You know, I can never get my favorite movies scenes out of my head, Back to the Future. But you remember like Doc Brown in 1955 seeing the camcorder, which is, you know, 150 times the size of a modern iPhone, and saying, "Oh my God, it's an entire movie studio in this one box." So in one sense, we're in the most advanced age in all of human history. I think that's like obviously true. The low quality of our public discourse, given that we are in this technological age, does suggest we are in a uniquely stupid age. I think if you look at for example, there's been analysis of presidential speeches and what grade level they're aimed at. And it has steadily declined over the past 50 years. You don't have to go back that far to a time when a presidential speech sounded like it was aimed at incredibly intelligent adults. And now it sounds like it's aimed at a gaggle of morons. And that's because it is now actually the case that our political speeches are aimed at an average reading level of 7th grade. So, you know, H.L. Mencken likes to say, democracy is the theory that the people know what they want and deserve to get it good and hard. And I think we need to radically take back what it means to get educated in this country, because we're getting it good and hard in terms of the way our public discourse looks and sounds. All right. What's next?
This one's really good, and you're going to have a lot to say.
All right, Sam, I have a question. Do you, to any extent, blame the rise of extremist progressivism on the rise of secularism in America. Yes. I do. I think they're connected, and I wonder, I'm not sure which comes first, is what makes this a hard question to answer. The rise of extremist progressivism and the rise of secularism. So, the easy answer, in a certain sense, which is not unique to me, but I think is very much true, is that as participation in religion and belief in God and in a creator has declined, it has been replaced with cockamamie nonsense and woke gobbledygook. So radical environmentalism, kind of neo-pagan belief in Mother Gaia as the true thing that we should all care about. Race and identity, which is largely on the left, but is also a little bit on the right. We can't say it's not. The whole, obsession with whiteness cuts in two directions. It's mostly coming from the left, and certainly from the education system and higher ed. It's all there. But there's some right-wing collectivist nonsense going on too that I just as thoroughly oppose. There's just not as much of it. I think it turns out, I firmly believe this, and this is where I part ways with people I used to sort of see myself as being sort of part of philosophically, sort of the rational optimist, Steven Pinker types, and even, a lot of libertarians. I don't think we get to some super rational world for humans. We're not especially rational. Like, that's a fact. So if your philosophy assumes that human beings can be perfected, which is the core of progressivism. Progressivism believes that we are born as blank slates that can be perfected. That is a kind of Nietzsche sort of God is dead, we are now the Übermensch, we are now God position. And I think it's just as crazy and wrong to believe that we can become hyper-rationalists. And this is where I part ways with, Ayn Rand objectivists and atheist libertarians. We can't. There's no evidence to support this idea. People make decisions irrationally. They make them purposefully. We don't get to a world like we have right now if we aren't capable of making progress and discovering things that work and building on things that work to build more complex things that work. But we make decisions based on our gut, and it's not always super rational, and we aren't going to end up being a society of Dr. Spock. We're going to, if we're not careful, and we might already be there, just be a one giant mental institution. Shouting at the sky, concocting new religions in our mind and being sort of consumed by cults. I think most of modern progressivism today is now, and I don't mean this to say the people, but as a philosophy, I think it's essentially an anti-Christian death cult. It takes the ideas of Christianity, the universal dignity of people, the transcendental utopia that awaits us in heaven. And it strips them of their transcendental nature, turns them into kind of an earthly assertion that can't be proven, and down to hell we go from there. So there you have it. All right.
Another parenting question.
Okay. Julia, what's the best way for a parent to start teaching their child economics young so they don't grow up believing lies about handouts being nothing but good? Teaching them young. Well, I think having your kids work early is really great. In fact, I am very pro child labor. The sooner your kids can work, the sooner they can earn money for themselves, the sooner they can connect. And our son has worked from an early age. We've actually been kind of terrible at this in other ways. Like, we gave him an Apple Card, which sort of totally abstracts the connections. So don't do that. Like, don't follow I didn't even follow my own advice on this. But the sooner your kids can understand trade-offs, that, oh, I worked hard to get this money I have, and I can either spend this, or I can spend it on this thing or this thing. I can get these magic cards now, or I can wait and get the planeswalker that I really want later. As the dad of a kid that loves magic, I know these things. Trade-offs is super important. Opportunity costs. The moral feeling, the agency that comes with earning what you get. It turns out that giving people stuff doesn't even make them happy. There's been tons of studies about this, the best of which are actually the ways that lottery winners end up miserable and broke, which turns out to be most of the time. When you haven't earned your success, you know you didn't earn it. And kids learn this really quickly, even when you don't try. So when you get the everybody gets a trophy experience, all the kids know who was better and who stunk. And they just have hidden trophies of their own, some of which might involve beating up the kid who stinks who got a trophy. But get them out into the mines. That's my answer. Okay, what else we got?
This is a good one. We were talking about this before the show, so I know you have a lot of thoughts.
Any thoughts on the VP debate? Well, I think, again, none of this should ever be taken as an endorsement. We don't do that here. But I think it's pretty obvious that J.D. Vance won the debate. I was actually, and not to sound all mushy, middle of the road, that ain't me. I'm not that. But I really liked that these two men stood there and treated each other like human beings with respect. I really liked that. I actually thought that harkened back to something better. I think that real leadership, and this isn't just about politics, this is about everything. This is about leading a company. And I've actually had great bosses, even in big corporations. I know it's fashionable to hate big corporations. There's plenty of reasons to hate big anything. But real leaders lead voluntarily. They are Pied Pipers that bring people along in their vision, in their way, in how they interact. That means being able to agree with someone that you actually fundamentally are trying to beat. And I think we saw a good amount of that in that VP debate. I think it's shocking to the point of stomach turning that the moderators, after the prior debate, where the moderation was so out of whack, it was nuts, and where they were poorly fact-checking only Trump, the fact that they started in on that again, it just shows you what an absolutely insular bubble these people live in. And again, I have been in this bubble. I know what this bubble is. You might say I still live in it now. But the sort of media at the highest levels, and academia, and even the corporate space, you just end up talking to all the same people, and everyone sounds kind of the same. And they have this completely myopic view, which includes a notion that Donald Trump is a unique liar, is uniquely dishonest, and needs a uniquely intense and vigilant kind of scrutiny, because otherwise democracy dies in darkness. We have to protect against the democracy dying in darkness. And that's just not true. He's just another guy that lies at roughly the same rates as the rest of them do. And so that is a function of living in a bubble that is fundamentally antithetical to being able to have critical thinking. And I don't know what to do about it. Newsrooms, it's been studied, vote more partisan than any district in the United States. So Berkeley, California will vote more heavily for Donald Trump than the newsrooms of our major media outlets. And I don't know how we can look at that and think anything other than that's a scam. and essentially a kind of like in-kind donation to one of our two political parties. That's my take.
All right.
All right, what else?
I think we're wrapping up here. So
I don't know. We can keep going if we got if people are around.
okay.
I got the energy.
Good.
There was the assumption that no one would show up. Because, you do a thing for the first time. Who the hell's going to care? What else we got? Let's see. Okay. Jake B. Do you think Waltz was prepared for a knockdown, drag-out debate like with Trump, and that is why he appeared so stumped for the first half of the debate? I honestly don't know. It looked like he was just nervous. I don't think I can add anything useful to that, although I appreciate the comment. You could be right. I mean, it has definitely been the case that all the debates we've had since 2016 certainly have been crazy and combative. But he certainly wasn't prepared to enter in a combat way either. So I think he just wasn't prepared to be good at this. And I do think that, and this is a special insight, you're not going to be good at engaging in this kind of thing when you're protected from it. So again, the Democracy Dies in Darkness team has insisted on hiding its candidates for the past couple election cycles from real scrutiny. And, iron sharpens iron, right? So they aren't doing themselves any favors by hiding out from media scrutiny and unstructured conversations and getting asked hard questions that they don't already know the answer to or haven't had it slipped to them. Whether that can win in the end, your brain loses and the public loses by not actually having the discourse play out that way.
This is a tough one.
Okay. Baha, do you think we'll see a global disaster, i.e. the Great Flood, or a nuclear holocaust first? First? Oh, no! What do you mean first? If you mean before, like, the rapture? Is that what you're saying? I don't want any of those things to happen. I really would rather none of those things happen. Disasters obviously do happen. So I think what would be great? It would be great to not induce disaster, right? I would like that. I would like the institutions that claim to be there to protect us from disaster to at least nominally be good at that, like at all. So we saw in the aftermath of, the virus that the institutions at the national and international scale that said that they got this and they've spent billions of dollars preparing were just wholly inadequate and made matters worse at just about every turn, and then lied and censored and bullied and fundamentally damaged everyone's view of both medical treatments and science in general. So that sucks. That's a human disaster that didn't need to happen. I'd like us not to go into World War III. World War III can be avoided, I think. That's a human disaster. And I would like to not drive the planet into energy-starved, desperate, grinding poverty in the name of being afraid of the boogeyman of climate change when the underlying science about climate change doesn't suggest drastic action of any kind, actually, if you actually look at it for real, rather than the so-called designated experts that are out there mouthing off about the end of days and look at the underlying material. Inducing disaster I am against, and I think we need to find a way to keep our leaders from driving us off a cliff. It might be a good idea to, instead of worrying about climate catastrophe, maybe try to prepare ourselves against a meteor hitting the planet and a solar flare or EMP knocking out the electric grid and blowing transformers that can take up to 6 months to replace. In the world of the precautionary principle and black swans, those two have happened. The Carrington event happened. The wiping out of the dinosaurs happened. And so an adult society would say, hey, what kind of black swan should we prepare for, and kind of engage in a somewhat expensive insurance policy that might never need to be utilized. I'd pick those two before sucking plant food out of the air or trying to get everybody to put corn in their gas tanks. But that's just me. All right, what else we got?
Okay. Communism. Something you have a lot to say
My
about.
favorite. My favorite subject. My favorite dead horse to beat, or 100 million dead bodies to beat. JB, how do you respond to people who claim that real communism hasn't been tried, yet in light of all the evidence to the contrary? Now, I've done a bunch of videos on this. There's a lot of ways to answer this question. So, okay, how do I do this and not have it take a super long time? Well, the first thing would be to say, look, real communism has never been tried. That is true. Real free market, truly laissez-faire economics has never been tried, where the government only protects contract and property rights and otherwise leaves adults alone to engage in whatever they want so long as it's peaceful, which is what free enterprise is. Free enterprise is just adults engaging in peaceful trade and exchange and contracts with each other for goods and services, and that's what it is. That's so-called capitalism, which is a Karl Marx term. I prefer free enterprise, frankly, but at the end of the day, I don't really care. So you have this spectrum, right? Neither ideal has ever been tried. So then you have to look at reality. So get out of utopia, get out of Blackboard, sort of academic ivory tower nonsense with people drawing lines on boards like Paul Samuelson, one of the most influential economists of the 20th century, whose famous economics textbook actually had a graph in it showing the point at which the USSR would beat the United States in GDP. It had this graph, and it said, look, and he continually updated the graph, shifting the date at which the USSR would eclipse America right up until the USSR collapsed. So even the people who are like, should know better, don't. Because ideology and sort of metaphysical ethics is at the base of this. But empirically, in the spectrum, as we get closer to something that looks like free enterprise, America being the best example of that in terms of historically, not necessarily today, you get enormous human prosperity. You get the poorest people in the given country living better than the richest people in most of Earth. That's what happens as you get closer. So there's an economic freedom index. Sweden and all of Western Europe is way closer to the capitalism side of that spectrum than to communism, democratic socialism, all that stuff. That's all a bunch of nonsense. They have free enterprise, they have open markets, they have private property, they have stock markets that you can lend things, you can start new firms. They're mostly free market countries. As you get to the other side, though, you turn into murder factory prison countries. You turn into places where they build walls to keep their people in. You don't get all the way to be way before you get to real communism, where no one owns anything and therefore everyone owns everything, but actually it's the state owns everything. In fact, this was said in Maoist China, the governors would tell the peasants, you don't own the teeth in your mouth. They are owned by the people, which is to say Mao. I'll point to something especially great, actually. The economic miracle of China escaping Maoist murder factory hell and turning into an actual place where hundreds of millions of people live relatively middle-class lives started during Mao in small villages who essentially reinvented free enterprise. basically private property and savings. And this story is actually beautifully told by NPR, of all things, about how this transformation took place, about how local villages said, I know we will literally be murdered if we keep the product of our work for ourselves, but we are going to starve to death if we don't. And so they made a compact in secret, like a black market. And the towns, without changing any of the materials or importing any technology, became the most productive agricultural towns in the country, to such an extent that it couldn't be ignored by their communist overlords. Mao, thank God, was dead. And the little miracle of reinventing free enterprise in Maoist China got replicated in their special economic zones. So it's a spectrum. It's a reality question. The closer you get to real communism, the closer you get to the hellmouth of unimaginable horror and despair. The closer you get to free enterprise, you get to places where the poor are overweight because they have so many calories. All right.
Okay, last one, and I think it sums it up, so here we go.
All right. Baha, this is fun, John. Thanks for doing this. Well, I'm glad you think it's fun. I certainly like to talk. So if this is useful for you all, we'll keep doing it. Again, I am humbled that so many of you come watch the videos that we all put so much work into here at Dad Saves America. I think that I think we're all called in different ways to try to make this world and this country a better place. I love this country. I believe in its founding principles. I believe in its evolution to more fully embrace life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I want to keep it that way to the best of my ability for my son and for my grandchildren to come. And I think most of you do too. And though we might disagree on particular ways to get there, I think we can disagree in ways that hopefully go from heat to light. I think that's the best thing about having open discourse, is the heat sometimes produces light. And that's what we try to do here. And we're going to keep doing it to the best of our ability. Have a great weekend.